Hey there, and welcome to Family Revenge. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with us for every twist and turn. Let's jump right in. I stepped into the high rise lobby, the smooth marble floors and gleaming glass walls a stark contrast to the unease coiling in my chest. My heels clicked sharply against the polished stone, each step a reminder of how out of place I felt here. The lawyer's office was sleek, pristine, the kind of place my family always belonged to, but never quite accepted me in. My palms were sweaty, but I wiped them down my sides before anyone could notice. A deep breath did nothing to calm the pounding in my chest. "Ms. Chase, they're expecting you," the receptionist said, barely looking up from her phone. I nodded, too anxious to speak, and followed her gesture toward the elevators. I couldn't shake the memory of my family's eyes when they first told me I needed to be here. Their expectations were always so clear. Testify about Grandpa's estate, show up, and leave. Just a formality, they'd said, as if I'd ever been anything more than an afterthought to them. I barely recognized myself when I thought back on the way I'd grown up. Max, my perfect golden boy of a brother, was always the one praised, always the one celebrated. "Focus," my dad would say, eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "Stop chasing your little dreams and think about the family." I was an urban planner, someone who found beauty in cityscapes, in buildings with purpose, in communities made from the ground up. But that never mattered. Max, he was always the one meant to take over the empire. Real estate, high rises, the family name. And me? I was dismissed, unfocused. But now, as I stepped closer to the elevator doors, the truth weighed on me heavier than ever. Because deep down, I knew today wasn't just about the will, it was bigger, much bigger. My investigation into Max's financial dealings was slowly creeping up to the surface, and I had no idea how today was going to end. But I knew this: the truth was more dangerous than any of them realized. As the elevator doors slid open, I stepped inside, my heart beating too loud in my ears. This meeting was just the beginning. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I exhaled slowly as the car ascended. I could already hear the low hum of voices echoing through the building. My stomach churned with something sharp: anticipation, fear, or maybe just the familiar taste of being out of place. When the doors opened, I followed the lawyer's assistant down a long corridor, past glass-walled offices filled with sleek desks and busy assistants. I felt like I didn't belong here, like I was walking in someone else's world. When we entered the conference room, my family was already sitting at the large table, the atmosphere suffocating with their familiarity. My father, Robert Chase, sat at the head of the table, commanding the space without even trying. His sharp, tailored suit fit him like it always had, like a second skin, designed for power. Beside him, my brother Max was lounging back in his chair with that trademark smile, the kind of smile that made people believe he was the golden child. His hand rested casually on the back of his chair, like he owned the room. And, in a way, he did. I walked in, feeling the weight of their gaze. It was like they couldn't even see me, at least not in the way I needed them to. They were too busy charming the lawyer, a well-dressed man whose name I hadn't even bothered to learn. He was listening intently to my father's low voice, hanging on every word, nodding in approval. "Anna," my father finally said, his tone flat. "Sit down. We're almost ready." He didn't even look at me when he spoke, his attention still fully on the lawyer. Max didn't even acknowledge me. His eyes flicked over in my direction, but that was it. No, "Hey sis," or even a fake smile. I wasn't even a blip on their radar. I took a seat at the far end of the table, trying to make myself small. The familiar sting of being invisible settled over me. I could almost hear my father's voice from years ago. "You'll never make it in this world, Anna. Real estate's where the money's at, not these plans of yours." I shut my eyes for a second, the memories rushing back. My father's disappointment in my career, his constant pushing for me to fall in line, to follow Max's path. I'd won planning awards. I'd helped create sustainable urban development projects. I'd been recognized in my field, but none of it mattered to them. None of it was real because it didn't fit the narrative they'd built. Max, the golden boy, the one they'd always put on a pedestal. I could still hear their voices ringing in my ears from family dinners. "Max is going to take over the company someday. He's got the vision." And then, with a dismissive wave, "Anna, she's still figuring things out. She'll come around." I snapped out of my thoughts when the lawyer cleared his throat, addressing me directly for the first time. "Ms. Chase," he said, his voice smooth, professional. "We're calling you in today as part of the family trust. Though, as I understand it, your role is mostly a formality. I could hear the unspoken words. Just show up, give your testimony, and leave. No one expected me to actually contribute anything of value. Understood, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'll do what I need to. The lawyer nodded. Excellent. He flipped through some papers in front of him, as if I was just a blip on his list of things to get through. As the conversation droned on about the family trust, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was irrelevant here. My father's business was the centerpiece of everything, and I was just the odd one out, a distant relative who'd gone rogue. They were discussing numbers, figures, and deals like they didn't even care about the family ties that held us all together. Max was the one getting all the attention, just like always. I shifted in my seat, bracing myself. I was going to do this. I didn't care about their indifference anymore. This wasn't just about Grandpa's estate. This was about the truth, and about time someone finally saw me for who I was. The lawyer looked at me again, this time with a knowing glance. We'll head to the courthouse shortly, Miss Chase. Just try to keep your testimony brief. Don't worry, I said flatly. I won't take up much of your time. I stood up before he could respond and headed out of the room. The courthouse was waiting. The walk to the courtroom felt like I was walking into another world entirely. I entered the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest, as I took a seat far away from the family, right at the back. It felt almost symbolic, the way I had to sit away from them. I was never part of their world, never truly part of their picture. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my mind running a mile a minute. This was it. The confrontation was coming. And today, I wasn't just going to be the black sheep. I wasn't just going to play the part they'd cast me in. Today, I was going to make them see me. The courtroom was packed. The media was already buzzing around, photographers snapping pictures as they huddled together. The lights from their cameras flashed with a blinding intensity, making everything feel surreal. I was seated in the third row, as far from the front as possible, though I could still feel the weight of everyone's gaze. My family was up there, front and center, like royalty. My father, Robert Chase, was sitting tall, exuding confidence and power, as he always did. Max sat next to him, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him, smiling and nodding at the reporters with that same calculated charm of his. He was the golden child, the heir to everything, and here I was, practically invisible in the back. I kept my gaze forward, trying to steady my nerves. The room was tense. You could feel the pressure, the expectation hanging in the air. The Chase family, wealthy, powerful, respected, was under scrutiny for the first time in a long while, and I wasn't sure who would come out of this looking worse. The opposing lawyer stood, adjusting his glasses, clearing his throat. He was calm, collected. Too collected. His presence was deliberate, like he was about to pull the strings and make the whole thing fall apart. Ms. Chase, he began, directing his voice toward me, but it was clear he wasn't asking a question just yet. He was setting a scene. You've had a strained relationship with your family, correct? Particularly with your late grandfather? I felt the heat rise in my chest. I'd braced myself for this. My family's mess would be used against me. It wasn't just about the estate. It was about painting me as the outsider, the one who couldn't fit in. Yes, I said, keeping my voice steady. There were some differences. The lawyer smirked, clearly sensing an opening. And those differences, would you say they contributed to your absence from key family events? From your grandfather's final years? I didn't flinch. I knew where this was going. I was busy with my career, I replied, matching his tone with one that was equally calm. I had projects that required my attention. Projects that didn't involve family, he pressed, his voice dripping with implication. Projects that took you away from your own flesh and blood. I looked straight at him, meeting his eyes. My career didn't keep me from my family. It kept me from pretending to be something I'm not. You can call it estrangement, but it was a choice, not a mistake. He glanced down at his notes, like he was deciding how to proceed. And what about your career? The nature of it? Would you describe it as stable? Focused? I felt my jaw tighten. The word unstable hung in the air between us like a trap. He was trying to paint me as unreliable, a failure in the eyes of anyone who might be listening. But I wasn't about to let him twist the narrative. I've built a career in urban planning, I said slowly, each word deliberate. I've worked on public housing projects, sustainable development. I've won awards for it. I wouldn't call that unstable. He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a slight, dismissive smile. Awards are nice, Miss Chase. But I think the question everyone is asking is why someone with such a stable career couldn't make it to family gatherings. Why did you abandon them? Why did you abandon your grandfather? I felt the sting of those words, the accusation. Abandon. It was a word they had all used before, and not just about Grandpa. Abandoning the family legacy, abandoning them. I didn't abandon anyone, I said, my voice firm now. I made my choices. I'm not a part of the family business, and I never was. But I didn't abandon anyone. The lawyer's smile faltered, and he shifted tactics. And yet, you were never part of your grandfather's plans, were you? His estate was passed down to your brother, Max, just as he intended. And your role? A mere formality, it seems. Max shifted in his seat, finally looking in my direction, his eyes briefly meeting mine before quickly looking away. His usual calculated calm had slipped a little. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang, feeling the weight of it. The truth was that my grandfather had never intended for me to take over the business, but that didn't mean I wasn't part of the family. They were trying to use my absence as some kind of evidence of my failure to contribute, but what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't here to argue over the will. Not anymore. The lawyer, sensing a change in the air, pressed forward. Tell us about your relationship with your brother, Max. Would you describe it as close? The words hit me like a punch. The relationship between Max and me? It had been a silent war, one I had lost long ago. But I wasn't going to let that stop me now. We don't talk much, I said, keeping my voice even. But that doesn't mean I don't know what's going on. Max's gaze snapped to mine, sharp and calculating. The tension between us was electric. The lawyer leaned forward, clearly sensing he was getting somewhere. What exactly do you mean by that, Miss Chase? I held his gaze, letting the words hang in the air for a beat. It means I know exactly what's going on with Max, and it's not what you think. The lawyer froze, caught off guard by my calm certainty. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I wasn't just here for Grandpa's estate. I was here to expose the truth. The moment my name was called, I stood up without hesitation. The motion felt automatic, like I'd rehearsed it in my head 1,000 times. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral, my movements controlled. I made my way to the witness stand, my eyes briefly meeting my family's. My father barely glanced up from his notes, but Max looked at me, just for a moment, before his gaze flicked away, his face unreadable. I settled into the chair, the weight of their indifference pressing down on me. The opposing lawyer approached, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. He gave me a tight smile before he started in with the questions. Ms. Chase, he began smoothly, his voice like honey. Can you tell us about your relationship with your late grandfather? I took a breath and settled my hands in my lap. I knew exactly where this was going. They wanted to paint me as a stranger to my own family, someone who had abandoned not just them, but the legacy they had built. It was the same old narrative they loved to tell. We had a good relationship, I said, keeping it simple. He was passionate about architecture, about creating spaces that mattered. We shared that passion. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. And yet, despite that bond, you chose to pursue a career that had nothing to do with the family business, didn't you? A non-conventional career, if you will? I could hear the judgment in his voice. He was trying to twist my choices into something less respectable, less connected. But I was used to this. The same way they'd always dismissed me, my father's voice echoing in my head, real estate is where the money is. That's where you should have gone. Not this urban planning nonsense. I chose urban planning because it mattered to me, I said, voice steady. I worked on projects that helped people, that created spaces where communities could thrive. My grandfather supported that. He respected it. The lawyer's lips twitched, clearly not expecting me to answer with such confidence. But I wasn't about to let him shape this story for me. He leaned in slightly, probing again. Despite this support, you chose to distance yourself from the family, didn't you? How many years did you spend away from the family? Missing key events? Refusing to participate in the business? He let the words hang in the air. You didn't think that would have any impact on your relationship with your grandfather, did you? I felt the prickle of frustration, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't ignoring my family, I was working, and I wasn't refusing to participate. I wasn't interested in being a part of something I didn't believe in. That's not the same thing as abandoning anyone. He smirked, clearly sensing an opening. But when your grandfather passed, you weren't there, were you? You were elsewhere? Too busy with your projects. He emphasized the words as if it was a crime to have a life outside their world. I wasn't elsewhere, I said, my voice crisp now. I was focused on the work I had to do, the work that had meaning. That's not abandonment. The lawyer straightened up, a satisfied smile tugging at his lips. And yet, you didn't receive any part of the estate, did you? Your brother, Max, is the one who was entrusted with the family's future. Max's name hung in the air, and I felt my stomach tighten. This was the part where I could feel the real shift. I wasn't just here to defend my place in the will. I was here to expose the lie they'd been spinning about me, to show how far they were willing to go to erase me completely. I glanced at my father and Max, both of them stone-faced, indifferent. I had never seen them look more like strangers, even though they were the ones I had spent my life trying to please. Max's eyes met mine briefly before he turned away again, and I saw it, the faintest flicker of something behind his calm, collected expression. Fear. For the first time, I recognized it. The lawyer pressed on. So, would you say your grandfather's decision to leave the estate to your brother, and not to you, had something to do with your unconventional life? The question stung, but I fought it down. No, I said firmly. I think it had to do with the fact that I was never part of the family business. My grandfather respected what I did, but he understood that I had my own path. The lawyer's eyes narrowed slightly, but he was too smooth to show any real sign of being rattled. And what about your relationship with your father? He asked, as though the question was an afterthought. How would you describe that? The room felt colder. My father's name hung in the air like a weight, dragging down everything. I didn't want to answer, but I had to. My relationship with my father, I began carefully, has always been strained. He never understood my career, never thought it was good enough. I could hear his voice again, sharp in my mind. You'll never make it, Anna. You're too focused on these ideas that don't make us money. Yet, the lawyer pressed, his voice low, you still claim to have had a relationship with your grandfather, despite spending years away from the family, despite never being a part of their business. I clenched my hands into fists, the words stinging, but I didn't back down. I wasn't just here for this petty fight over money and legacy. I was here to show them all that there was more at stake than their narrow version of success. It's not about money, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the room. It's about truth, about what's real. The lawyer paused, clearly thrown off. For a brief moment, I saw something shift behind his eyes. This wasn't the fight he thought he was winning. Because as much as he was trying to erase me from this story, I was finally starting to see the whole picture. They didn't just want me out of the will. They wanted me erased from everything, and I wasn't going to let them. I was going to make them see me. The courtroom buzzed with conversation as the judge called for a recess, and I stepped out of the room, my mind racing. I needed a break, time to clear my head, to figure out how to handle the mess I just walked into. The air outside the courthouse was cool, a welcome contrast to the heat of the courtroom. I leaned against a brick wall, closing my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up this charade. Every question the lawyer asked felt like another twist in a story I wasn't sure I could control anymore. The weight of my family's expectations, their dismissive attitudes, was starting to feel like a trap I couldn't escape. I was trying to make sense of everything when I felt a presence behind me. A voice, low, calm, broke through my thoughts. Miss Chase, I turned, startled, and saw a man in a suit standing a few feet away from me. He was tall, with dark hair, a clean-cut face, and eyes that didn't quite match the casual tone of his greeting. Can I help you? I asked, my voice guarded. I wasn't in the mood for more distractions. I'm Agent Thompson, he said, flashing a badge briefly. Federal agent, I'm investigating your brother, Max. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Max? My brother? A federal agent? I blinked, trying to process the information, but my mind couldn't catch up. What do you mean, investigating? My voice was shaky, more out of surprise than fear. Max hasn't done anything wrong. Agent Thompson didn't flinch. I'm afraid that's not the case, Miss Chase. We've been tracking Max's financial dealings for some time now. Offshore accounts, fraudulent property transactions, and we have reason to believe he's been hiding illegal funds using shell companies tied to the family's business. I took a step back, my breath catching in my chest. I didn't know what to say, how to process this. Max had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. I don't understand, I said, feeling the ground beneath me shift. Why are you telling me this? Agent Thompson looked at me. his expression serious but not unkind. Because we need your help, Miss Chase. You're the only one who might have access to the information that could take him down. We need evidence, documentation, emails, anything that can prove the connection between Max's illicit dealings and the family's business. The weight of his words sank in, heavy and suffocating. I could barely wrap my mind around what he was asking. Max, my brother, had been hiding something this massive for who knows how long, and now it was on me to expose him? I I swallowed hard, the taste of betrayal bitter in my mouth. Why me? Why come to me with this? Because you're the only one who doesn't have blind loyalty to him, Agent Thompson said, his voice low. Your family has kept you out of the loop, but you're also not blinded by their wealth and power. Max thinks you're harmless. He's underestimated you. I wasn't sure whether to be angry or relieved. My brother had always played the perfect role, the golden child, the one who made it all look effortless. I had spent my life trying to get out from under his shadow, but now it felt like everything had turned upside down. I don't know if I can do this, I said, shaking my head. I don't know if I can turn on my own family. Agent Thompson's gaze softened, but his words were firm. It's not about turning on anyone. It's about doing what's right. Your brother's actions don't just affect him, they affect everyone around him, including you. If this goes public, your family's business, their entire empire could collapse, and you'll be dragged down with it if you don't help us. I felt a lump form in my throat. My family, my father and brother. Everything I had ever wanted, everything I had ever hoped to fix or salvage was tied up in this web of lies and corruption. And Max? My brother had crossed a line that went beyond anything I could have imagined. I need to think about this, I said, my voice trembling despite myself. I'm not sure I can help you, but I'll need some time to figure out what to do. Agent Thompson nodded. Take your time. But understand, the longer you wait, the more damage gets done. Max is running out of time, and so is your family. I watched him walk away, feeling the weight of his words settling deep in my chest. The world I'd known, the world that had always seemed so secure in its assumptions, was crumbling around me. I didn't know how much longer I could stay caught between loyalty and truth, but the stakes were higher than I ever thought possible. Max's actions weren't just about the money or the estate anymore. They were about something much darker, and I had no idea what would happen next. But I knew one thing for sure. Everything had just changed. I couldn't walk away from this. Not anymore. The walk back into the courtroom felt like stepping into a pressure cooker. My mind was still reeling from Agent Thompson's visit, the weight of the decision I was now facing sinking deeper with each step. I had just learned things I wasn't ready for, and now I was expected to sit back down and pretend like everything was normal. The room was just as tense as when I left, still full of reporters, still buzzing with the undercurrent of a family at war. My father, as always, sat at the front, looking every bit the commanding presence he was known to be. Max was beside him, stoic and cool, as if none of this was happening. He always knew how to keep it together. I almost hated how well he could pretend. I took my seat in the back again, away from them, and steeled myself. I couldn't let them see how much this was eating me up inside. I wasn't sure I was even capable of looking at them the same way anymore. The shift inside me was real, deep. Everything had changed in the last hour, and I knew I couldn't just sit there like I was still the black sheep of the family anymore. Max's lawyer stood up, already in the middle of his cross-examination. His voice was smooth, dismissive, as though he were playing a well-rehearsed part. Ms. Chase, let's talk about your relationship with your brother Max, he said, his eyes scanning the room before landing back on me. It's clear to everyone that you've always been the disgruntled family member, wouldn't you say? The word disgruntled hit me like a slap. I couldn't help the flicker of anger that sparked in my chest, but I kept my face neutral, forcing the emotion down. This wasn't personal, not anymore. I wouldn't call it disgruntled, I said evenly. I'd call it independent. The lawyer's lip twitched with amusement, but he pushed forward. Ah, yes, independent. But let's talk about Max. You and your brother, you've had your disagreements, haven't you? Can you honestly tell this court that you've had a close relationship with him? A supportive one? I glanced over at Max. He hadn't even turned to look at me, his eyes fixed on his lawyer. But I could feel the tension creeping up from his side of the table. He wasn't as unaffected as he wanted to seem. We've had our differences, I said, but that doesn't mean I haven't kept an eye on him. I know exactly what's been going on in the family business. There was a flicker of surprise in Max's eyes when I said that, though he quickly masked it with another practiced smile. The lawyer, however, was ready to pounce. Are you implying something about your brother's involvement in the family business, Ms. Chase? Something unethical? I could feel the room tighten, the air thickening. I wasn't about to let him frame this as me just being bitter. Not anymore. It wasn't about the past, it was about the present. Unethical? I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue. What I'm saying is that I've noticed a pattern. I've seen the shady deals, the way Max has started to involve himself in questionable financial transactions, the offshore accounts, the fraudulent property dealings. I'm not blind. I've just never had the proof to back it up until now. Max's face went pale for a split second, and I saw him glance nervously at his lawyer. The lawyer was still calm, but I could tell I'd hit a nerve. A sharp glance passed between them, one that said everything. They were rattled. I held my ground, keeping my gaze steady. You want to talk about my relationship with my family? Fine. Let's talk about the truth. Max's growing involvement with money laundering, his connections to shell companies, and the way he's been using the family business as a front for his own financial games. There was a ripple in the room. Some of the reporters leaned forward. The lawyers at the front froze, their expressions shifting from smug to wary. Max's lawyer cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. Ms. Chase, he said, his voice icy now, can you prove these wild claims? I met his gaze, my heart thudding in my chest, but my voice remained calm. I can't prove anything right now, I said, but that's about to change. The air in the courtroom felt charged, like static before a storm. I wasn't sure what had just shifted, but I felt it. Something had changed. I wasn't just a pawn anymore. I wasn't a bystander in my own family's game. I was a player, and for the first time, I could feel the power that came with it. Max's lawyer stammered, trying to regain his composure, but it was too late. I had thrown the first real bomb in this battle, and I could see it all unraveling in front of me. Ms. Chase, the lawyer said, his tone now clipped, we'll take a recess to examine this new development. I nodded, my mind still spinning. I wasn't sure what was coming next, but I knew I had made my move. I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I was something far more dangerous. As the court adjourned for the break, I felt the weight of everything shifting. Whatever happened next, I was no longer just a witness. I was part of the story now, and I wasn't going down without a fight. The courtroom was buzzing with low murmurs as we returned from the break. Max's lawyer was trying to reassert control, but I could tell things had shifted. The air felt different now, thicker, heavier. There was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. I wasn't sure if anyone else could feel it, but I could. I sat still in my seat, my eyes scanning the room, trying to prepare myself for what was coming next. I had done what I could, but I knew I was in deeper than I had ever intended. Still, I wasn't turning back now. The truth had already started to unravel, and there was no putting it back together. The judge rapped his gavel, bringing the room to attention. We will now resume, he said, his voice stern. Just as the proceedings were about to continue, the door to the courtroom swung open, and several federal agents entered. The collective murmur of the room escalated, but what really hit me was the weight of the silence that followed. It wasn't just the agents, they were here with a purpose. I didn't know what was happening until Agent Thompson stepped forward, holding a stack of documents. He moved toward the bench, where the judge nodded and motioned for him to approach. The room grew still. I felt my breath catch in my throat. This wasn't just about a will anymore. This was bigger. Your Honor, Agent Thompson said, his voice calm but firm. We have obtained new evidence that ties Max Chase directly to a series of criminal activities. Max's face went pale. His usual confident expression faltered, just for a second. But it was enough for me to see the cracks. The agent handed the judge the stack of papers, and the judge immediately began flipping through them. I couldn't tear my eyes away from Max. He was frozen, caught in the web of his own making. His lawyer was no longer speaking, his attention riveted on the agents as they stood in the back of the room. The judge paused in his reading, his brow furrowing. He looked up at Max, his eyes narrowing. Mr. Chase, he said, his voice now tinged with disbelief, are you aware of the extent of these allegations? Max's mouth opened, but no words came out. He closed it again, his jaw tightening. He was trying to regain control, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity he could. But it was slipping away, fast. My father, who had been sitting so proudly at the front of the room, was now leaning forward, his face ashen. The walls around him, built from years of wealth, influence, and power, were starting to crumble. I couldn't help it. I watched him, the man who had always looked at me with disdain, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. The judge turned back to the documents. These documents, he said, his voice even, contain evidence of a series of illicit real estate transactions, false reporting, illegal funds funneled into shell companies. Max Chase appears to have orchestrated a web of financial misconduct that could involve hundreds of millions of dollars. The courtroom was dead silent. I wasn't sure if it was the weight of the evidence or the shock of it all, but no one dared speak. The reality of it hit me all at once. Max wasn't just at the center of this legal battle over Grandpa's estate. He was now a key figure in a criminal investigation, and it was unfolding right here in front of all of us. Max's lawyer moved toward him quickly, whispering something urgently in his ear, but Max didn't respond. He was shaking his head, almost in disbelief, like he couldn't comprehend what was happening. It wasn't the Max I'd known, the charming, self-assured older brother. This Max was rattled, vulnerable. I felt a twinge of something in my chest. Was this what I wanted? Was this how I'd envisioned the truth coming to light? Max was crumbling before my eyes, but a part of me was finally letting go of the years of resentment I had carried. Resentment for all the times I'd been dismissed, for all the ways my family had treated me as less than, for all the ways I'd been ignored, pushed aside, and ridiculed for my choices. My father stood up slowly, his hand gripping the back of his chair, his knuckles white. His face was flushed with anger and frustration, his expression no longer the composed, calculating businessman I had always known. It was as if the ground beneath him had shifted, and now he was scrambling for stability. "You can't—" My father's voice broke, but he quickly cleared his throat. "This is a mistake. This is all a mistake. My son has done nothing wrong." His voice was rising now, the veneer of control slipping. The judge looked at him with cold eyes. "Mr. Chase, the evidence speaks for itself. We will need to suspend these proceedings until we can fully investigate the allegations. I'm placing a temporary hold on the distribution of the estate. You're free to go for now, but we will reconvene once this investigation is complete." I watched as Max and my father stood up, their expressions now hardened. They exchanged a brief, loaded glance, but neither of them spoke to me. I wasn't part of their world anymore. Not really. As they filed out, I stayed in my seat, my body heavy with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was something deeper, something I hadn't fully understood until now. Max wasn't just risking everything for money, he was pulling the whole family down with him. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I cared. The moment the judge's gavel struck, the courtroom exploded. Max's lawyer was frantically flipping through his papers, trying to salvage the wreckage, but it was too late. The federal agents were already moving. The realization that this was no longer just about a family inheritance was settling in, and Max's face, a mask of confusion and fear, was the only thing I could focus on. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward in a clatter that echoed through the room. "This is bullshit!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. The words were out before he could catch them, and his eyes darted toward the exit. He was making a break for it, his last-ditch attempt to escape the mess he had made. The agents were on him in seconds. One grabbed him by the arm, and the other moved to block the door. Max tried to jerk away, his eyes wide with disbelief, but the agents were too quick, too strong. His hand was wrenched behind his back, and the chaos in the room escalated. "You can't do this!" Max shouted, but it was futile. He struggled, but his body was already being forced toward the front of the courtroom, the weight of his actions finally catching up to him. The room was buzzing, the sound of whispers and cameras flashing filling the air. I stood there frozen, watching it unfold in real time. I'd expected something like this, sure, but seeing it, the panic on his face, the way his entire world was crashing down, felt surreal. I wasn't sure what to feel. Part of me felt sick, but another part of me felt nothing. The federal agents led him toward the door, and I caught a glimpse of my father's face. The pride, the indifference, the stone-cold businessman mask. Everything that had defined him for so long had shattered. It was gone now, replaced with a look I hadn't ever seen before. Helplessness. I watched him try to push through the crowd, moving to intercept the agents, his voice shaking as he called out, "Let him go! You have no right!" "Mr. Chase," one of the agents said, his voice firm and unyielding. "Step aside." He didn't raise his voice, But there was no mistaking the authority behind it. But my father didn't move. He was fighting, struggling to protect Max, even now, even after everything had been exposed. His entire empire was crumbling around him, and he was still trying to save his son. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my legs stiff, my breath shallow as I pushed through the shock of it all. I moved toward my father, who was still shouting, still trying to protect Max, like this was just some misunderstanding that could be undone with a few more words. "Dad," I said, my voice steady but low, "you can't protect him anymore." He didn't look at me at first, his gaze still locked on Max, who was now being restrained by the agents. "What do you know?" he snapped, his words cold and angry. "You've always been out of the picture, Anna. Always looking for ways to tear the family apart." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat, forcing the words out. "I tried to reach out to you. I did reach out, but you—" I cut myself off, shaking my head. "You never wanted to listen. You never cared about anything I was doing. You never even looked at me. All this time, you were too busy building your perfect empire, keeping your son on a pedestal, to notice what was really going on. I tried to warn you." His eyes flicked to me then, and there was no hiding the flash of guilt that flickered behind his usual mask of control. But he quickly covered it up, shifting his focus back to Max. "You think you're so much better than us? So much more, what, ethical?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm. "You think the world works the way you want it to?" "No," I said, stepping closer, my voice unwavering. "But I don't lie to myself, and I don't protect the people who destroy everything they touch." My father's mouth opened and closed like he didn't know what to say. The words were there, I knew they were, but they were no longer enough. He couldn't defend Max anymore, not with what had just been exposed. Not with the evidence laid bare in front of everyone. The truth had come out, and there was no covering it up. As the agents ushered Max out of the courtroom, I stayed where I was, watching them drag him away, feeling the finality of it settle in. I wasn't just watching my brother's downfall. I was watching my family's entire narrative come apart at the seams. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I turned back to my father, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel any connection to him. This man, who had never cared for me, who had always looked at me like I was a disappointment, a failure, he wasn't my father anymore, not in any way that mattered. The agent had already started speaking to the judge, finalizing Max's arrest. And I knew this wasn't just the end of the inheritance case. This was the end of the Chase empire, the beginning of something bigger than I could have ever imagined. I left the courtroom without looking back. My family was gone, in all the ways that mattered. I was a stranger in my own life now, but as I stepped out into the hallway, I knew I didn't regret a single moment of it. The truth had come out, and it was messy, but it was real. And in the end, that was all I had. The moment I stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the day hit me like a flood. My body was sore, my mind still spinning. The streets outside were packed with news crews, their cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions I didn't want to hear. I felt like I was suffocating in their gaze, like the entire world was watching me. I kept my head down and walked quickly, the click of my heels against the pavement the only sound I could focus on. I didn't need the world's attention. I needed silence, space. I found a small cafe a block away, tucked into a corner where no one would recognize me. The door shut behind me with a soft chime, and I breathed a little easier. I took a seat by the window, the noise from the street muted by the glass. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, glancing at the headlines already popping up on my screen. Chase family scandal. Max Chase arrested for fraud was the first thing I saw, and my stomach twisted at the sight of my last name in the press. But this time, it wasn't just about the family legacy. My name was right there in the story, front and center. I scrolled through a few more articles. The words Anna Chase jumped out at me from every headline, no longer buried under the weight of my family's name. The phone buzzed in my hand, and I nearly dropped it. It was a message from Agent Thompson. "Formal charges being filed against Max today. Your help was crucial. Thank you for your role in bringing the truth to light. You've done the right thing." I stared at the message for a long moment. There was a part of me that wanted to feel proud, wanted to bask in the recognition. But it wasn't about that. It wasn't about the headlines or the gratitude. It was about the truth finally being exposed. It was about the years of silence breaking open, the years of being pushed aside and told my voice didn't matter. A small, bittersweet smile tugged at my lips. This wasn't the victory I had imagined. There was no celebration, No triumph. Just a strange emptiness, the kind that comes when you've spent your whole life chasing something and then finally realize it wasn't worth chasing at all. I put my phone down and stared out the window, watching people go by. None of them knew who I was, and for the first time in a long time, I felt okay with that. I was finally free from the weight of my family's expectations, from the suffocating role I had been forced to play. I had nothing left to prove to them. I didn't need their approval, their praise, or their recognition. I had done what was right, and that was enough. I paid the bill and left the cafe, stepping out into the world that felt unfamiliar and new. For the first time, I felt like I was walking away from everything I had once been. And it felt good. The past was behind me, the truth was out, and whatever came next, I was ready to face it. With every step I took away from that courthouse, away from my family, I knew I was finally free.